In the eastern stretch of the Bay of Bengal, beyond the regular paths of shipping routes and commercial traffic, lies a small island covered almost entirely in dense forest. It forms part of the Andaman archipelago, a chain of islands scattered between the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. From above, the island appears uninterrupted, green canopy meeting pale shoreline, with no visible roads, no cleared land, and no constructed harbor. Coral reefs surround much of its perimeter. These shallow barriers limit access, forcing boats to remain at a distance. The water near the shore is often calm, but the reefs create a natural boundary that is difficult to cross without precise navigation. There are no markers, no signals, and no indication of safe passage. The island's interior remains largely unrecorded. Aerial surveys show dense vegetation, likely tropical evergreen forest, with no confirmed mapping of paths or settlements. Seasonal weather patterns shape the island's conditions. Monsoon rains arrive with consistency, bringing humidity, freshwater accumulation, and periodic storms. Dry periods follow, though the climate remains warm throughout the year. From a distance, the island presents no immediate sign of activity. No smoke is always visible. No structures are clearly defined from the air. It exists in continuity with its environment, unchanged in appearance across decades of observation. It is known today as North Sentinel Island. North Sentinel Island is inhabited by a small indigenous group commonly referred to as the Sentinelese. They are among several indigenous communities of the Andaman Islands, though they remain distinct in their continued isolation. Unlike neighboring groups, they have had no sustained or peaceful integration with outside societies. What is known about them is limited, drawn from distant observation, brief encounters, and comparative study with other Andamanese peoples. Anthropologists generally place the origins of the Sentinelese deep in prehistory. Genetic and cultural evidence suggests that their ancestors may have been among the earliest human populations to migrate out of Africa, reaching the Andaman Islands tens of thousands of years ago. Over time, rising sea levels separated these islands from the mainland, isolating their inhabitants. This separation likely occurred thousands of years before recorded history. Their language is unknown and remains unclassified. Attempts to understand it through comparison with other Andamanese languages have not produced reliable results. There are no recorded translations, and no sustained interaction has allowed for linguistic study. As a result, their system of communication remains entirely internal. Population estimates vary. Observers have suggested a range between a few dozen to a few hundred individuals, though no census has ever been conducted. The density of forest cover and the absence of direct access make verification impossible. What can be confirmed is that the population has persisted across generations without external support. Their material culture, as seen from a distance, appears consistent with a hunter-gatherer way of life. They use simple tools, including bows and arrows, and construct small vessels capable of navigating shallow waters near the reef. There is no evidence of agriculture, large-scale structures, or metal production originating on the island itself. However, they have been observed repurposing metal from shipwrecks or debris that reaches the shore. The absence of sustained contact has preserved a way of life that operates independently of global systems. There are no records of trade, no evidence of dependency on external resources, and no indication of technological adoption beyond what is found or adapted locally. Despite this, their isolation has not gone entirely unnoticed. For over a century, passing ships, colonial administrators, and later government expeditions have documented their presence. Each attempt to approach has reinforced a consistent pattern. The Sentinelese maintain distance, often through visible resistance. Their separation from the outside world has continued into the present, not by accident, but through repeated and deliberate refusal of contact. The earliest recorded references to North Sentinel Island and its inhabitants appear in the accounts of British colonial activity in the Andaman Islands during the 19th century. At that time, the British Empire had established a penal colony on South Andaman Island, bringing administrators, soldiers, and convicts into the region. As part of their efforts to map and document the surrounding islands, officials began noting the presence of indigenous groups, including those on North Sentinel. One of the first detailed accounts is attributed to Maurice Vidal Portman, an officer who conducted expeditions in the late 1800s. His approach reflected the practices of the time, which often involved forced contact. During one such expedition in 1880, Portman and his team landed on North Sentinel Island. They found no inhabitants at the shoreline but observed signs of recent activity, including huts and pathways. Further movement inland led to the capture of several individuals, including 2 elderly people and a number of children. The group was taken to Port Blair, the administrative center of the Andaman Islands. Within a short time, the elderly individuals became ill and died, likely due to exposure to diseases to which they had no immunity. The children were later returned to the island, though the long-term effects of this encounter remain undocumented. Following this event, British records indicate a reluctance to pursue further direct contact with the Sentinelese. The outcome demonstrated the risks associated with forced interaction, both for the islanders and for those attempting to engage with them. Disease transmission, in particular, became a recognized concern in dealings with isolated populations. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sightings of the Sentinelese were limited and often occurred from a distance. Passing ships occasionally reported figures on the shore, observing them watching or signaling from the beach. In some cases, arrows were fired toward approaching vessels, indicating a clear intent to maintain distance. These early encounters established a consistent pattern. The Sentinelese were aware of outsiders, but they did not seek engagement. Their responses, whether retreat or resistance, were directed toward preserving separation. By the early 20th century, North Sentinel Island had become known not for exploration, but for absence. It was marked on maps, but rarely approached. The distance between the island and the outside world remained intact, shaped by both caution and refusal. In the decades following British withdrawal from the Andaman Islands, administrative responsibility passed to the Government of India. By the mid-20th century, the presence of isolated indigenous groups in the archipelago had become a subject of anthropological interest and state policy. Among these groups, the inhabitants of North Sentinel Island remained the least understood and the most resistant to contact. Beginning in the 1960s, Indian authorities initiated a series of controlled expeditions intended to establish limited communication with the Sentinelese. These efforts were led by teams that included officials, medical personnel, and anthropologists. One of the most closely associated figures with these missions was Triloknath Pandit, who participated in multiple expeditions over several decades. The method used in these attempts followed a cautious pattern. Boats would approach the island's shoreline but remain beyond the coral reef. From this distance, members of the expedition would leave items in the shallow water or on the beach, then withdraw. These items typically included coconuts, metal tools, and occasionally cloth. The intention was to signal non-hostile presence and observe the response. Initial reactions varied. In some instances, the Sentinelese remained hidden, observing from the tree line without approaching. At other times, individuals appeared on the beach, armed with bows and arrows. Their posture was often direct. Arrows were occasionally fired toward the boats, though not always with the apparent intent to strike. The gesture suggested a warning rather than an immediate attack. Over time, a pattern of brief and controlled proximity developed. In certain encounters during the 1970s and 1980s, members of the Sentinelese approached the shoreline after the visiting boats had withdrawn. They collected the offered items and retreated into the forest. These exchanges remained one-sided. There was no sustained interaction, no shared space, and no attempt by the islanders to follow or communicate beyond immediate gestures. In 1974, a film crew, accompanied by Indian officials, attempted to document one such contact mission. During the approach, a member of the crew was struck by an arrow, resulting in injury but not death. The expedition was halted shortly afterward. The event reinforced the consistent risk associated with proximity. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, a small number of encounters appeared less confrontational. In some cases, Sentinelese individuals approached the water without visible weapons, accepting coconuts handed from a distance. These moments were limited and did not extend beyond the immediate exchange. No verbal communication was established, and no individual from the island boarded an external vessel. Despite these instances, the broader pattern remained unchanged. The Sentinelese did not initiate contact. Their acceptance of items did not indicate a shift toward integration or openness. Each encounter was brief, controlled, and isolated in time. In 1991, one of the most noted contact attempts occurred, during which a group of Sentinelese approached the waterline in greater numbers than previously observed. Members of the expedition, including Pundit, reported a moment of reduced tension, where physical distance between the two groups briefly narrowed. Even in this instance, interaction remained nonverbal and limited to the transfer of coconuts. Following this period, the frequency of contact missions declined. Concerns regarding the health and safety of the Sentinelese became more prominent. Studies of other indigenous groups in the Andaman Islands had shown that exposure to external diseases could result in rapid population decline. The absence of immunity posed a significant risk, even in brief encounters. In 1996, the Indian government formally ended its policy of active contact. North Sentinel Island was designated a protected area, and a legal exclusion zone was established, restricting access within a defined radius. Enforcement was assigned to local authorities, with the aim of preventing both accidental and deliberate intrusion. Subsequent events reinforced this policy. In 2006, 2 fishermen who had drifted near the island were killed after their boat entered the restricted zone. Reports indicated that their bodies were recovered by the Sentinelese and remained on the island. Attempts to retrieve the remains were abandoned due to safety concerns and the risk of escalation. These incidents underscored the consistency of the Sentinelese response. The presence of outsiders, regardless of intent, was met with resistance. There was no evidence of curiosity leading to engagement beyond immediate context. The boundary was maintained without variation. In the early 21st century, surveillance of the island continued at a distance. Occasional aerial observations confirmed the continued presence of inhabitants. Following the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, a helicopter was dispatched to assess the impact on the island. As it approached, a Sentinelese individual emerged from the shoreline and fired an arrow toward the aircraft. The helicopter withdrew without landing. This response indicated not only survival, but continuity. The island's population had endured a major environmental event and remained capable of defending its territory. Across decades of observation, the pattern remained stable. Contact was offered, approached, and refused. Each attempt, regardless of method or intent, ended at the same boundary. The Sentinelese did not move toward the outside world. They remained where they had always been. By the late 20th century, the pattern surrounding North Sentinel Island had become defined by repetition. Approaches were made, observed, and answered in the same way. The Sentinelese maintained distance. When that distance narrowed beyond their tolerance, they responded with force. The establishment of a legal exclusion zone by the Government of India formalized what had already existed in practice. A perimeter was drawn around the island, extending several nautical miles from the shore. Entry without authorization became prohibited. The intent was not only to protect those who might attempt to land, but to prevent disruption to the Sentinelese themselves. Enforcement of this boundary has remained consistent but not absolute. The waters around the island are used by local fishermen, and unintentional drift has occurred. In such cases, proximity has often led to confrontation. In January 2006, 2 fishermen from the Andaman region entered the restricted zone after their boat reportedly drifted during the night. Their vessel came to rest near the reef. When contact occurred, it followed the established pattern. Both men were killed by the Sentinelese. Subsequent aerial observation confirmed their bodies remained on the island. Authorities chose not to recover them, citing both safety risks and respect for the isolation policy. The event did not alter the approach taken by the state. Instead, it reinforced the existing stance. The island would remain unapproached, and intervention would be limited to monitoring from a distance. More than a decade later, in November 2018, another incident drew international attention. An American national, John Allen Chow, arranged for local fishermen to transport him near North Sentinel Island. His intention was to establish direct contact. Despite legal restrictions and prior warnings, he made repeated attempts to reach the shore. Accounts from the fishermen, later reported to authorities, indicate that Chow approached the island using a small boat and eventually a kayak. During his final attempt, he landed on the beach. He was met by members of the Sentinelese and killed shortly after arrival. His body was seen being dragged inland. The incident prompted renewed discussion about the island's status and the risks associated with contact. Officials reiterated the existing policy. Retrieval of the body was not attempted. The exclusion zone remained in place. These events, separated by time but similar in outcome, illustrate a consistent reality. The Sentinelese do not distinguish between accidental and deliberate intrusion. The response remains the same. The boundary is enforced without negotiation. There is no indication that this position has changed. Aerial surveys conducted intermittently continue to confirm signs of habitation. Small groups are observed along the shoreline. Temporary structures appear and disappear within the tree line. Movement suggests routine activity, though details remain unclear. No external authority governs the island's internal life. No agreement has been established between its inhabitants and the outside world. The separation is maintained through action rather than policy alone. The boundary holds because it is actively defended. Across generations, without recorded interruption, the Sentinelese have preserved that line. It is not marked by fences or signals. It exists in response, repeated each time it is tested. What occurs within North Sentinel Island is not directly recorded. There are no sustained observations, no embedded studies, and no continuous documentation. The daily life of the Sentinelese must be understood through inference, drawn from brief sightings, environmental context, and comparison with other indigenous groups of the Andaman Islands. The island's ecosystem provides a consistent range of resources. Dense forest offers plant materials for shelter and tools. Coastal waters support fishing, while tidal zones provide access to shellfish and other marine life. Observations from a distance have shown individuals carrying bows, fishing in shallow waters, and moving along the shoreline in small groups. Their tools appear to be constructed from locally available materials. Bows and arrows are commonly seen, with arrowheads sometimes tipped with metal. This metal is not produced on the island. It is believed to be collected from external debris, including shipwreck remnants or discarded objects that reach the reef. These materials are reshaped and reused, integrated into existing tool-making practices. Shelter structures have been observed intermittently. Some appear as temporary lean-tos, while others suggest more stable communal spaces. Their placement varies, indicating movement within the island rather than permanent settlement in a single location. This mobility may be linked to seasonal changes, resource distribution, or environmental conditions. There is no confirmed evidence of agriculture. Food gathering appears to rely on hunting, fishing, and foraging. The absence of cultivated land suggests a continued reliance on natural cycles rather than controlled production. This approach requires detailed environmental knowledge, developed and maintained over generations. Fire use has not been consistently documented. Some reports suggest the presence of fire, while others remain inconclusive. If fire is used, its methods of creation and preservation are not known. As with other aspects of their life, the absence of direct observation leaves this uncertain. Social structure is also inferred rather than confirmed. Group sizes observed along the shoreline are small, but these may not represent the full population. There are no verified accounts of leadership systems, division of labor, or ritual practices. What can be assumed is that coordination exists at a level sufficient to maintain continuity, resource management, and defense. Health and longevity remain unknown. The population has persisted, but without external medical contact, their exposure to disease is limited to internal transmission. This isolation has likely contributed to their vulnerability to outside pathogens, reinforcing the risks associated with contact. Time on the island is not measured against external systems. There are no records, no written accounts, and no known methods of long-term documentation. Knowledge is transmitted through practice and memory, sustained within the group itself. Across thousands of years, this system has continued without integration into broader human networks. It operates independently, without reliance on external technology, trade, or communication. The details remain incomplete. But the continuity is clear. In the present day, North Sentinel Island remains formally protected under the law of India. A restricted zone surrounds it, enforced to prevent approach by sea or air beyond a defined distance. This policy reflects a shift from earlier efforts at contact to a position of non-interference. The island is not considered uninhabited or unknown. It is recognized, but deliberately left alone. Surveillance continues at a distance. Coast Guard patrols monitor nearby waters to deter entry. Occasional aerial observations confirm the continued presence of the Sentinelese. These sightings are limited in detail but consistent in implication. The population remains active. Movement along the shoreline, the presence of small groups, and the maintenance of tools suggest continuity rather than decline. There are no ongoing attempts to establish communication. No new expeditions are authorized to land on the island. The risks, both to the Sentinelese and to outsiders, are considered too high. Exposure to external disease remains a primary concern. Past experiences with other indigenous groups in the Andaman Islands have shown how quickly populations can be affected by contact. The Sentinelese exist outside modern systems, but not outside awareness. Their presence is acknowledged in legal frameworks, anthropological records, and international discussions on indigenous rights. They are often described as one of the last uncontacted groups in the world, though even this term is imprecise. Contact has occurred, but it has not been sustained, and it has not been accepted. What remains is distance. No agreements define their relationship with the outside world. No shared language bridges the gap. The boundary persists without formal negotiation, maintained through repetition and recognition. Their history extends far beyond recorded time. Their future remains undefined within it. From the shoreline, the island still appears unchanged. Forest meets water. Movement is occasional and distant. There are no signals directed outward. The silence is not absence. It is maintained.